It started out so well, and then the bottom just dropped out. What happened? And where is God? I thought that God was with us. I thought that God was guiding and directing us. And now, in this, you ever felt like that? Well, then you've got something in common with a whole lot of people, including the Apostle Paul. After he became a believer, Paul traveled from place to place, telling people about Jesus and planting churches, and then going to another place to do the same thing. When you turn to Acts chapter 16, Paul's trying to figure out where to go next. And he's got some ideas, but he keeps getting a no, not there from God. Well, then he gets a vision of a guy saying, come here and help us. And he takes that as a very clear sign from God, okay, go to Macedonia, which he does. And he's got some initial success there. And then the bottom dropped out. All because of one good deed. Here's what happened. Paul casts an evil spirit out of a servant girl, which is good, right? Well, except that the evil spirit had been enabling this servant girl to tell the future, and she was making lots of money for her owners, and now nothing. So they got mad, and they made some false accusations, including some really ugly racial ones, and they stirred up the crowd, and Paul and Silas ended up getting beaten up, not just by the crowd, but also by the law. And then on top of that, they end up getting thrown into prison. And this is not club fed here. This is jail. And given what we know about jails, prisons in the day, I'm pretty sure that there was no concern there for cleanliness or hygiene, and there wasn't any pest control team making sure that the jail's varmint free, and there's probably absolutely no concern for their cleaning and dressing the wounds that they got while they got that beating. And then if they're not uncomfortable enough already, they're put in the stocks, which would have left them kind of not really even able to move much and in a very uncomfortable position on top of all that beating, and nobody cares. Nobody cares or does anything to help, even though they're there just because they did something good for a girl who nobody else seemed to care much of anything about. So where's God in all this mess? Where's God in this dark place for them? Well, I think there's some bedrock Bible truth that here I think I see Paul and Silas actually holding on to, even in this dark and uncomfortable place. Bible truths like, number one, even when you don't see him or feel him, God is there. Second, that God always keeps his word. God always keeps his word, that he never goes back on a promise. And that means that when Jesus says, I am with you always, he's always with you. And this bedrock truth, that God doesn't send the suffering, it's Satan that does that. And Satan intends all suffering for your harm. He wants that suffering to hurt you. He wants that suffering to steal your joy, to rob your faith, and to drive you and others from God. But this is another bedrock truth that I see them holding on to here, that even in suffering, that God never stops working. God never stops working, and God never stops working for us and for our good. Which means that, number 5, even though Satan intends this suffering for harm, God can still and will still flip it for good. And God can work even through our stress and our suffering, and use it even as an opportunity for us to tell others about Jesus. Now, those are bedrock Bible truths. But those truths can be really hard to believe, especially when you're in a dark place like Paul and Silas were. So let's spend a little time processing that before we move on in this conversation. Which of those bedrock Bible truths that we just talked about have been challenging for you to believe? And why? Hit pause and then spend some time thinking about that right now. I think when you're in a dark place like Paul and Silas were, it's really hard to believe any of those Bible truths. But I've also found that you just have to. You just have to believe those things are true and that they're true for all time, because the alternative of not believing, that puts you in an even darker and less hopeful place. So as you follow through this story, I think what you're going to find is you're going to see that Paul and Silas were holding on to those Bible truths, and that it helped. And if it helped them, it can help you when you're in one of those dark places too. The other thing I think you're going to see here as you go through this story is you're going to discover that God was still working even through their stress and their suffering, and that he used that as an opportunity for them to share Jesus with others in a way that others probably wouldn't have listened and responded to under different circumstances. And the same thing can happen with you. So let's get into this Paul story and see how that all worked out. It's in Acts chapter 9.
Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening. Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off. The jailer woke up to see the prison doors wide open. He assumed the prisoners had escaped, so he drew his sword to kill himself. But Paul shouted at him, "Stop, don't kill yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, along with everyone in your household." And they shared the word of the Lord with him and with all who lived in his household. Even at that hour of the night, the jailer cared for them and washed their wounds. Then he and everyone in his household were immediately baptized. He brought them into his house and set a meal before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced because they all believed in God. The next morning, the city officials sent the police to tell the jailer, "Let those men go." So the jailer told Paul, "The city officials have said you and Silas are free to leave. Go in peace." But Paul replied, "They have publicly beaten us without a trial and put us in prison, and we are Roman citizens. So now they want us to leave secretly? Certainly not. Let them come themselves to release us." When the police reported this, the city officials were alarmed to learn that Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So they came to the jail and apologized to them. Then they brought them out and begged them to leave the city. When Paul and Silas left the prison, they returned to the home of Lydia. There they met with the believers and encouraged them once more. Then they left town.
So as you heard that, did you catch what Paul and Silas were doing there in jail? They were praying and singing. Praying and singing hymns to God, which I don't think they would have been doing unless they really believed that God was with them even in that awful place. Again, where are they? They're in jail, and it's not a nice place. What's their condition? Well, they've been grabbed by a mob and beaten up by the mob and the law, and now they're in leg irons. They are uncomfortable, to say the least, and probably still in a lot of pain. And when is this going on? Well, it's around midnight. When after the day they've had, you think they would have just at this point collapsed, or at least been really quiet and not drawing any more unwanted attention to themselves. And what are they doing? Right? If you notice, they're not whining or complaining or cursing God or their captors, and they're not screaming for their lawyers. They're not even announcing at this point loudly, "Hey, we're Roman citizens, what are you doing here?" They're praying and singing. I mean, praying because they know their Bible, Things like Psalm 50, verse 15, call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, God says, and you will glorify me. And they're certainly in trouble, so they're hearing that, they're remembering that, they're praying. And then this singing hymns to God, praising God in less than ideal circumstances. And I think they're doing that because praise has a way of redirecting your thoughts from the miserable circumstances that you're in to the one who's with you in those circumstances and is able to help. And did you catch the next line that Luke records after this? Let me read it to you again. It's starting at verse 25. Around midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Now here's the line. And the other prisoners were listening. You know what that tells me? It tells me your attitude is important. Right? Your attitude is important, and your attitude when things aren't going well can actually give you opportunities to share Jesus with others who likely wouldn't have listened if you just started talking Jesus from the get-go. Now, by attitude here, I don't mean put up a false front, be fake, be overly spiritual and say stuff like, I just lost my house or my job or my marriage. Praise God. Or I just got cancer. Thank you, Jesus. Or I just failed the test, or I got cut from the team. Way to go, God. I mean, that's not spiritual. That's just weird. And people don't respond to weird or fake. What they do respond to is authentic. And that's what I see Paul and Silas being here. Authentic. In the mess, in the darkness, but still holding on to those basic Bible truths about God. So, when you're in those dark places, and sometimes you are, just be real. All right? Don't pretend that nothing's wrong when it is. And don't put on a false front like you're all happy with God when you're not. And don't say you're not scared or stressed when you are. But also, when you're in those dark places, keep holding on to those foundational truths about God. Because as you're holding on to those foundational truths about God, like Paul and Silas were, it'll get you to a different place. A place that other people inwardly wish that they could go to as well. A place where even in the darkness of the storm, you have a refuge. Right? A refuge that keeps you safe, even when it looks like you're anything but.
Sometimes we live life in the middle of a storm, left out in the open, exposed to the elements. No matter where we look, protection seems miles away. Shelter feels out of reach. Lately, these storms have grown stronger, more intense, more difficult to bear. Where do we look when we can't see the way forward? How do we find safe harbor? In the midst of the ebb and flow, God promises to be our refuge and our strength, our ever-present help in times of trouble. In our most desperate moments, we can rest safely behind the rock of our salvation, protected by the shadow of His wing. Yes, life has its troubles, but our God is a mighty fortress, our stronghold, our refuge.
You know, Paul and Silas really believed that. They held on to that basic Bible truth. God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble. And I think that's why they're praying and singing, even in that awful place. Not with some overly spiritual bravado, but sort of with a quiet confidence and with an authentic trust in a God that they believed was with them, even though it appeared to outside observers as if he wasn't. And you know what? Those hardened men in that prison, they noticed. They were listening. And perhaps even wanting some of what Paul and Silas had for themselves. Otherwise, why they stay around when a little bit later in the evening they had a chance to go free? Well, guess what? People are still watching. I think they're always watching. They're watching how you react when things don't go so well. And they're watching how you react when you struggle with the same sort of stuff that they do. And when they see something different about your attitude, when they see a peace and a joy and a graciousness in those dark times that they can't explain, when they see you suffering and yet still praising God, even when all around you is still dark, then God has an opportunity, right? And there's a crack to share Jesus with that there wasn't there before. See, because there's so much stress and struggle and suffering in the world, when other people see and hear that, what I'll call a Paul and Silas-like attitude in you, they might want to know how they can get it too, because they want to make it through their pain just like you're making it through yours. And then God has that opportunity that he's looking for. Right? Now, attitude's important. So again, let's spend a few minutes processing this before we move on in this conversation. Hit pause and think through this. What have you done, or what could you do to be able to keep praying and keep praising God even when you find yourself in a very dark place? So attitude is important. And perhaps some people who've read through the first part of Paul's story or who've read through some of Paul's letters might have even seen that coming. A good attitude in the face of adversity, peace and joy, even in the midst of really bad trouble. Paul writes about that a lot. But what happened next? This one's really kind of hard to fathom. I'm reading from verse 26 right now of chapter 9. Suddenly, a violent earthquake shook the foundations of the jail. All the doors immediately flew open, and all the prisoners' chains came loose. Now, if you're Paul and Silas, what do you do at this point? Run, right? You run. You save yourself. God's heard your prayers, and the chains have come off, and the doors are open, and escape's possible. So you escape. That's great for you. But it's really bad for the jailer, right? Because in that day, if prisoners escaped, the jailer knew that it was his duty and his punishment to die. Which is why Luke reports that the jailer is about to kill himself. And then you read this, verse 28. But Paul shouted as loud as he could, "Don't hurt yourself. We're all here." Paul and Silas stayed put. And they encouraged all the others to do the same. And they did it out of concern for the jailer, the very person charged with keeping them in misery, which means they did good where it was totally unexpected. Unexpected good. I mean, unexpected good for the sake of someone else. Unexpected good for the sake of someone who wasn't being particularly nice to them. I mean, you know anybody like that in your life who's not being particularly nice to you? I mean, just hold on to that because we're going to circle back there in a moment. The result here of this doing good in an unexpected way, in an unexpected place, well, the jailer and his family ended up becoming believers. And I think the point that we can take from that there is that doing good, when it isn't expected, can open up possibilities. It can open up possibilities for sharing hope and healing in Jesus' name, and people might actually take that message to heart when they might not have done so before. Yeah, it's hard. All right, no argument from me on that. But it's also Christ-like. I mean, consider Jesus. Jesus came and he did a lot of good even to those who didn't ever give him anything back. And Jesus went to a cross because that's what was necessary to pay for our sins and to restore our lost relationship with God. He died for all. I mean, did that good, died for all, even those who were putting him to death. And Jesus stayed on the cross when he could have walked away at any moment because Jesus thought of us above everything else, thought of our good before his own. So think about this. When I'm doing good where it's not expected or to those who don't deserve it, I'm following in Jesus' footsteps, aren't I? Now to make it practical, let's circle back. Think about it in these terms. What people who don't deserve it can you do good for? Or what people can you do good for when what you're feeling is like pushing back at them or running away because of how cruddy they're treating you? The cruddy boss, the cranky neighbor, the annoying or backstabbing coworker or friend, the person who takes credit for the stuff that you did, and on and on and on. Again, take a few moments before we move on to stop and think about that right now. And don't just think about that person, all right? Think about the good, some good that you could actually do for them this week. And then write it down, and then, because it's going to be so hard, you can't do it yourself. Ask Jesus to help you do that good for that person that you just wrote down. Go ahead and do that right now. So in this part of Paul and Silas' story, I think we've seen two things today that may give you an opportunity to share Jesus. And to share Jesus with people who initially might not wanted to hear about Jesus at all. And as a bonus, we've also seen that that's going to help you make it through some of those dark and difficult times in your own life too. Here's the two things we've seen. Keep praying and keep praising God in all situations, even when life is hard and times are tough. And do good for others when it's almost totally unexpected. Now that's easy to say, a lot harder to do. So let me share with you a few things that I've learned over the years that kind of helped me with that. First thing is this: let your mind inform your heart. Let your mind inform your heart. See, you're not going to feel like praying and praising when times are tough and times are dark. And you're not going to feel like doing good when someone's being mean to you. So let your mind inform your heart. And by that I mean listen to what God tells you about those things. Here's an example. Philippians chapter 4, verse 6 and 7. Paul wrote this from prison. He says, "In every situation, let God know what you need in prayers and requests while giving thanks, and then God's peace, which goes beyond anything we can imagine, will guard your thoughts and emotions through Jesus Christ." Or this that he writes about doing good in Romans chapter 12, verse 17. Don't pay people back with evil for the evil they do to you. Focus your thoughts on those things that are considered noble. And then a few sentences later, verse 21, don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil with good. Now, when you're in those spots that you don't feel like praying and praising, that you don't feel like doing good, again, just keep telling your mind what God tells you. All right? Keep telling yourself God's truth. And understand that God's truth is so opposite the way that we're wired to think naturally that you're going to have to keep telling yourself that over and over and over again. Second thing, do those things over and over and over again. I mean, if you want to get good at anything, what do you have to do? Practice, 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 and more practice. Even superstars do that. They don't settle. They strive to get better. And they keep practicing their skills so that when the stress is on, it's almost automatic. That when the stress is on, what they need to do to succeed has almost become automatic because they've practiced it over and over and over again. So, let's apply that to what we've been talking about today. Pray regularly. Pray regularly so that when you're in one of those sticky or dark life situations like Paul and Silas were, that praying is what you naturally find yourself doing. And then praise and worship regularly. Again, so that when you're in one of those sticky or dark life situations like Paul and Silas were, you still find yourself almost automatically still thinking of God and praising Him for the fact that even in the storm and the darkness, that God is still God, and that God is still good, and that God is still love, and that God is still there. And then do those things not just by yourself, but with others. Do those things with others, because it seems to me as if some things, like encouragement, work a little better in person than they do in a text. I think that's perhaps why Luke drops this little P.S. into this end of this part of the story. I'm reading down at verse 40. After Paul and Silas left the jail, they went to Lydia's house. They met with the believers, encouraged them, and then left. See, believers need to hear these things about Jesus too, because we all have stress and struggles and suffering that we're dealing with. And at the time, it kind of weighs us down and stretches our faith, sometimes almost to the breaking point, and threatens to steal our joy. And we need to be reminded of how even in suffering and struggle that God's there, and that God helps us through. And that's why Paul and Silas went back to the believers so that they could be encouraged by seeing that that's what had happened. See, praising God with others and praying with others actually helps us with that encouragement. So, keep on praying so it becomes automatic in those dark times. Keep on praising God so it becomes automatic in those dark times. Keep doing it with others because you need that for encouragement, especially in those dark times. And then look for opportunities to do good when no one really expects you to. Now, that's a really hard one. So let me suggest that you start building up those do good when I don't feel like it muscles by starting at home. Perhaps even with just unexpected words like, thank you, or I noticed, or I liked. And then branch out perhaps to just some random kind words at an unexpected time. Again, just in your home. And then maybe adding doing a chore that's not normally yours to do. You know what? That'll help build up those doing good when I don't feel like it muscles. That'll help start you moving in the right direction so that you can do good out there, outside the home, outside the church, out there where it's really not expected at all, especially when there's nothing in it for you and the people you're doing good for aren't treating you particularly all that well. And you know, when you do that, when you do these things, you're showing Jesus to others. You're showing Jesus to others, and that might even give you an opportunity, like it did for Paul and Silas, to share words of hope and healing in Jesus' name in a way that they'll actually be heard and received. And heaven, it just might get a little bigger as a result.